So we have two ways of looking at this principle. This thing that we're saying is a principle. The dynamism between honesty and deception, or honesty and illusion. Now there's two ways of looking at it. We can look at it as we did in the last installment, in terms of how the universe manifests, which plainly isn't psychology, because it belongs in a different category. It's not what we human beings do, or it's not looking at the way we human beings think about things, but it's the universe itself. So that naturally gives it a grand universal significance. So what we were saying is that the universe does this thing whereby it pretends to be what it isn't. And this isn't a new idea, this has been said before. But it is an idea that we're not particularly familiar with, for all that it is remarkably apt. So Robert Anton Wilson uses the image of the magician with the trick top hat. So there's the magician with his shiny top hat, and he's pulling things out of it. So he pulls a rabbit out of it, that's the usual thing, and maybe a bunch of canaries, and he pulls out all sorts of stuff from his trick top hat. And that's what the universe is like, or that's what the proto-universe is, what comes before the universe is, according to this way of looking at things. The universe pulls stuff out of the hat and goes, hey, look at that. And we're all sitting around clapping and bemused and highly impressed because it's a good trick. It is a trick. It isn't a bona fide, genuine act of creation, which is what we think, but it isn't, because for the simple reason that the things that are produced aren't real. They only seem to be real when we fall into the way of looking at things that the phenomena that are produced themselves assume a certain framework or way of looking at things, and when we also assume with that framework, then the phenomenon in question seems real. So we could say that when the space-time continuum pops out of the hat like a big white rabbit, and then we see things within terms of that space-time framework, as indeed that's what we're all doing all the time, then it very much seems to be real to us, and relative to our viewpoint it certainly is real. Outside of that viewpoint it isn't. It's a tautological loop. It's only real according to the perspective that it itself assumes. And this isn't a particularly radical idea. Anyone familiar with modern physics would be familiar with this idea. The idea is frequently floated that we can compare the universe with a particularly big quantum fluctuation. Quantum fluctuation is a kind of it's a little bit of froth that bubbles up from the void and is there for a second and then is dissolved again. It's a little fluctuation, a little plus and a little minus, and then the little plus and little minus self-annihilate, mutually annihilate, and then they're gone again. It's like, whoa, what was that? It looked like there was something there, but now there isn't. So that's quantum foam, that's quantum fluctuation. So it has been said that the universe is a very big quantum fluctuation and a long-lasting one. Well, that's a bit of a trick, though, because it's only long-lasting in terms of the framework and time that we are subject to when we're in that quantum fluctuation. Outside of that quantum fluctuation, we can't really say it lasts a long time. We can't say it lasts a long time because outside of that fluctuation, there is no such thing as time. That is the fluctuation before and after. That is the thing that pops out of the hat and causes us to go, whoa, look at that, what's that? And when it goes again, we're like, what was that? It seemed like it was a thing, but it isn't really. It was kind of a trick or something. So time and space can be seen in that way, if we wanted to see it in that way. But it's a neat way to see it because it gives us that extra perspective. And even to suggest that we could have that extra bit of perspective, which enables us to look at the space-time continuum, is pretty amazing because the space-time continuum is so big, so all-encompassing, so all-defining, that how the hell can we have perspective on it? And if we can have a perspective on it, isn't that something else? Isn't that quite amazing? It's always a good thing to have perspective. And it is possible to look at things in this way, to look at space and time as only an arbitrary construct that gets generated out of whatever it is that generates these phenomena, which is what comes before the physical universe, whatever it is that comes before the physical universe. And if we wanted to talk about it, we have to remember that we can't talk about it in terms of when, because there is no when, and we can't talk about it in time in terms of location, because there is no location, or big or small or anything like that. So it's kind of hard to talk about. One way we could talk about it is in terms of the universal sets in set theory. And most of us, when we were at school doing maths, we would have had an introduction to set theory. So there's this big thing, the universal set, and it's the set of all sets, only it's not really a set as such, because it's not defined. All sets are defined by their very nature. So we create a set, we pull it out of the hat, the top hat, by saying let Q equal the set of all numbers that are divisible by 3, and then we say let P equal the. So that is our definition, our criteria, and that's the way we pull out something defined, a finite set, out of the undefined universal set. It doesn't come out on its own. We have to put those criteria in place. We have to say the magic words like abracadabra. We have to impose boundaries, in essence, because unless we do that, there aren't any boundaries in the universal set. Now, I couldn't go very far with the maths of it, but I'm pretty damn sure there's no boundaries in the universal set, any more than there's no sets in it. There are only sets when they come out of it. So, what are they? What are the sets before they come out of the universal set, if they're not sets? And clearly, we can't really answer that. We don't know what to say, really. But there is potential there for the set to be pulled out. And when the set does get pulled out of the universal set, it very much occupies the foreground of our attention, and we get preoccupied with it and looking into it and checking out all its characteristics, which is something we can't do with the universal set. We can't check it out. It remains nothing more than an undefined potential. And further to that, we could also say that the process whereby a defined or specified set is pulled out of the universal set, and such that it occupies the foreground of our attention, and we don't really be aware of anything else. We can characterize that process as a process of information loss, because all the information that was in the universal set is lost, and all we have is the information in inverted commas relating to all the stuff in the finite set or the defined set, which crucially isn't information at all, even though it seems like it. It's not information at all, because it's information that is only information in relation to the framework assumed by the determinant world that has been pulled out of the top hat. So it's loop logic, it's loop meaning. And loop meaning, tautological meaning, seems like meaning when we're in that set, or when we're looking at things in that way that has been assumed by the set or by the determinate reality. But it isn't really information. And the reason we can say it isn't really information is because information really means something that's radically surprising, and we didn't see it coming, and we couldn't see it coming. We couldn't foretell it. It's not predictable. If something is predictable from where we are now, from the standpoint of our present position, then it's nothing more than an extension of our present position, and it's not information. There's no newness in it. It's just a reshuffling of the old, or a rejigging of the old. So that all the so-called information in a determinate world is loop information. It's redundancy that has the appearance of information. In other words, it appears to be something, but it isn't. So that brings us back neatly to the idea of truth versus deception. So what we have here is a situation where there is information, genuine information, i.e. the genuinely new, the genuinely unprecedented, or the genuinely unique, which we are necessarily blind to, just as long as we're operating out of the thinking mind. And then we have the disguised or camouflaged redundancy, which is a type of information that's sometimes called confirmation, because it confirms our existing biases in the matter. It agrees with our underlying way of looking at things. It agrees with our the assumptions that we've made, which we can see, and it does seem like genuine information to us, even though it isn't. And so the phenomena we relate to as being absolutely real and tangible and measurable are only real in this sense. So the information that we are obtaining is confirmation. It's really redundancy. So we have this situation where there's genuine information and redundancy, which is a term meaning zero information, only it's not visible as zero information, because there would be no dynamic tension if there was. If I could see a lump of zero information as zero information, that wouldn't deceive me. And if I could see zero information to be zero information, that actually would be information. It would be true. So then that's not deception. A lie, when it announces itself quite candidly as, actually, guys, I am a lie, that's an honest lie, which means it's not a lie. So the dynamic tension between truth and lie requires that redundancy pass itself off as being genuinely new, as being a genuine development, an actual thing in itself, and not merely a reworking of what came before, not merely a tautology. So once we have that, we do have the dynamic tension that we have been talking about in the last number of installments, the tension between good and evil. And it can be seen that this is a whole new way of looking at good and evil, because the way we're looking at it now, it's truth versus illusion, which of course is very familiar from the Eastern metaphysical systems, particularly Buddhism and the Hindu way of looking at things, because the disguised redundancy corresponds very exactly to Maya, or the play of illusion. And Maya itself is nothing without the truth, because if, as has been said, I can't remember by who, if Maya was all that there was, then there wouldn't be Maya. So that things as they actually are in themselves and the play of Maya are working together in this game that we talked about earlier, the cosmic game, which is the game of God. So the thing about illusion, in its essence, it's free from any morality, because an illusion is an illusion, it's a trick. If we look at it if we fall into it, we fall under its spell and it gets us to look at things in its way, then we see all sorts of stuff which isn't true, but which seems to be true. So this can be equated to the Christian idea of the fall of man, as it is called. Only that is linked with misbehavior, or not doing what you're supposed to be doing. You're told what to do and you don't do it. So of course Adam can blame Eve for it, and Eve can blame the serpent. But really, it is a disobedience. It's disobedience. Doesn't matter. There's no excuse for it, and there is a strong moral overtone. So we have to suffer as a result, as it says in Genesis. Great indeed is our suffering. That's not a quote from Genesis, but that's kind of the idea of it, really. We've fallen from a very, very great state to a lowly and painful state. Now, the same thing does happen when we fall under the spell of illusion. Even though we're not, this doesn't come under the motif of a disobedience myth, because no one was disobeying anyone, because there was no restriction in place in the first place, no law in place in the first place that we would disobey. There's no one saying you have to, or you mustn't do this, or you must do that. There's no breaking of the laws. But what is the same is that when we fall into illusion, or fall under the spell of illusion, there is great suffering inherent in that. And we might think, why would that have to be true? Because we can have nice illusions, just like we can have pleasant dreams. So we might say, well, how come I can't fall under the spell of illusion and have a nice time, have all these nice illusions, like nice stuff happening to me, even if it isn't true? It looks like it's true, and it might be nice stuff. So why can't that happen? And of course, the answer is that it can, in a kind of a limited way. But when it comes down to it, the illusion is always inferior in the sense that it is far more restrictive than the original reality. It makes out that there's a lot to it, and it makes out that it's great and that there's lots of possibilities, but they aren't really, because it's a tautological loop. So going back to set theory, we can say that if we say that illusion corresponds to a particular defined set that we've pulled out of the universal set and got trapped in, we know, even if we can't see it when we're in that situation, that the finite set is very limited. The whole point is that it's limited. It only comes into existence because of the limitations we put on it. That's what makes it stand out as an apparently real or definite proposition. And we know, even though we can't see it at the time, because we have no way of relating to the universal set, because it doesn't stand out in the way that the defined set does. But we know, from the standpoint of us talking about it now, that it is unlimited, because it's only by being unlimited that it gets to be the universal set. There's no rule behind it, there's no exclusion principle, but instead of an exclusion principle, there is the principle of all inclusivity, which means whatever it is, it's in the universal set. Universal set accepts everything. And that's not a rule, because a rule says this is allowed and that isn't allowed, whereas the all-inclusivity principle doesn't judge, it doesn't stop anything, it doesn't do anything, it doesn't interfere, everything is just allowed, and that's it. So we can see that the determinate reality is limited. Because it is by being limited that it gets to be determinate or tangible or material or physical, measurable or knowable in the way that the mind knows things. So because it's limited, it involves suffering. Because to be limited is to suffer, because our potential is denied. And the only portion of our being which is allowed is the portion of our being which is permitted by the system that we are adapted to. And actually, that system, being determinate or being a finite game, doesn't allow any of our true nature. Instead, it gives us a false nature, which is finite. It's basically a thing, just a thing, or a machine, or it's a finite thing. And so to be restricted in the false version of ourselves, which is nothing else but restriction, which is finite, and which is controlled by external mechanical forces, that is suffering. And so when we fall under illusion, there is going to be suffering there. Okay, thanks for watching.